Thank you. Welcome to the 2020 meeting of the Energy Charter Independent Accountability Panel. Thank you for the disclosure from Powerlink Queensland, which we have read and will discuss. In starting the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. You probably know the panel, Claire Petrie, the chair, Cassandra Goldie, CEO of ACOS, and Andrew Richards, CEO of the EUAA. I will pass to you in a moment, Paul, for you to do the introductions from your side. But first of all, we'd just like to say to you what we've said to every CEO, that we acknowledge that this has just been an unprecedented year with fire, floods, drought in some cases, and the COVID pandemic, just to round it off. This has obviously had an impact on all energy businesses throughout Australia, and you will probably want to talk about that. But by way of introduction, if you could just talk to your disclosure and highlight any particular parts that you'd like us to focus on, particularly negative and positive, and then we can open it up for discussion and questions. So I'll pass it over to you, Paul, and then we can take it from there. So thanks.
Terrific, thanks, Claire, and g'day everybody. Let me just quickly introduce my able helpers as well. So Jerry Riley, who you can see on screen. Jerry's our General Manager of Communications. He also happens to be the chair of the Industry Working Group. And Narelle Fortescue, who is our customer strategist. So they'll be needing to chime in every now and then, because I'm not sure whether you're all aware, but I've only been here for about 4.5 months, so I've still got my sort of Powerlink training wheels on, so to speak. But maybe let me just give you just some sort of overview comments, if you don't mind. I remember first seeing the Energy Charter when I was Director General of the Department of Energy up here in Queensland, and I've got to tell you, my initial reaction to it was actually a pretty nauseous one. I was deeply suspicious. To me, it looked like puff coming out of the industry, and I'm not sure that I sort of did anything other than sort of largely ignore it. So I turned up to Powerlink, found out that we were a signatory, and had a pretty cynical view in the first 2 seconds of hearing it. But actually, I sat back and listened to both Jerry and Narelle talk me through their take on it, what it's meant for the organisation. What I can tell you is, when I turned up to Powerlink, I was quite surprised at the level of customer focus for a transmission network business. It was striking to me, and by the way, I picked it up in a different part of the organisation that was focused on our revenue reset proposal, which we're currently going through at the moment. But that focus was a lot higher than I had probably anticipated. Now, having come out of an AGL and Infigen Energy, where you do have big sort of retail customer bases or retail focus, to sort of see it in the transmission business that's really sort of got one step back from the vast bulk of customers, it was sort of surprising. So, to the extent that the Energy Charter has had any hand in that, whether it's whether it's sort of helped guide that or indeed driven it, then I've had to stop and reassess and sort of and I can see that it has had a beneficial impact on this organisation. And I'll say beneficial, remembering there's a big difference between progress and success, and what I'm talking about is progress, not success. So there's obviously for our industry a long way to go. I think the other thing about and just thinking about our disclosure statement, obviously 2020 was a tough year. Organisations like ours are pretty good with tough, though. I mean, that's what sort of galvanises it. I mean, particularly up in Queensland, the network businesses are very used to things like cyclones, and that's actually when they do their best work. And I think when I look at what the organisations managed to achieve in in that COVID period. Bearing in mind, it's obviously been pretty easy up here over the last few months in comparative terms, but certainly you go back to sort of March, April, May, June, it wasn't. But the organisation performed reasonably well. It sort of, I mean, it managed to sort of mobilise and keep the the network reliable for customers under challenging conditions for all the obvious reasons. I think the other thing about our disclosure statement that I'd say about it is it's a pretty dispassionate and pragmatic assessment of where we think we're at. It's a pretty realistic view. It's sort of, yep, we've done a few things well, but by jingo, we've got a long way to go. And I think, look, the other thing is that and I guess an artifact or now just a matter of history. Some of the insights from recommendations and things from last year's report by the independent panel have been picked up internally and run with. And the most sort of specific example I can give to you on that is probably the way the organisation has really gone to quite a lot of work in terms of unpacking exactly what customer means from it's not just a homogeneous term. We've got all these segments and we need to understand those segments, and we obviously put quite a lot of that in our disclosure statement, particularly in the first handful of pages. So there's a bunch of other things, but look, I might stop there if it's all right, Claire. Maybe Jerry, if there's anything you want to add, otherwise hand over to the panel to.
Yeah, I think the only thing I just want to add, Paul, is just just to acknowledge the role that our own customer panel has played in the development of our disclosure statement. We really engaged with them throughout the last 12 months in different aspects of it. They were heavily involved in how we rated ourselves in the maturity, framework. And so I just want to acknowledge the role that our customer panel played in the development of the document. It's just great to get those continued insights.
Thanks, Jared. Paul, if it's any comfort, that's exactly the role of this panel, to try and distinguish fact from puff, and to really get to a point where we really believe the energy charter is making a difference. It has been embedded in the companies, and it does, I mean, obviously it's not the single game changer, but that it does have an impact on the culture, because that's a really important factor if you are talking, customer centricity. So that's our task, and we're finding these discussions very helpful in trying to sort the fact from the puff. So look, I might go to you, Andrew, first, if you'd like to.
For sure. I can see you've got the Powerlink rainforest behind you there, mate.
Yeah, it's a pretty good venue.
Not bad, not bad. Yeah, just as Claire said, just really taken by what we're seeing on the maturity model. We think is people confusing activity with outcomes, and I think your progress versus success, I think, lines up with that. So, and I'm reading through your disclosure. It's very pragmatic, and think you're doing well in some areas, and recognise you need to do better in others. And that's really, again, as Claire said, what we're about. So. I know you're working hard to embed this. Your predecessor worked hard, and the other people on the screen have worked hard as well. So embedding the principles within the business. But a business like yours has a lot of third parties working for it as well, so subcontractors and others. So I'm just wondering, what's the process and what's the plan of making sure that the principles that you're adopting within the business are also spread to those third parties that you work with, who are effectively your agents in the field?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. Look, the starting point, I suppose, is how you filter it down. I mean, one of the things I can tell you is that we've had certain outcomes from the prior year's episode where we've started to hardwire KPIs in the executive and the senior leadership team. So and they had bonuses riding on these, right? So in terms of getting the commitments that we made sort of wired across the organisation. In terms of how we sort of that next level down, I suppose it's in the way in which we contract with those counterparties and making sure they've got the same incentives and the same sort of overall objective that we do. are we doing it sort of in a sort of a chiseled and methodical way? I'm going to have a stab and say there'll be a lot of room for improvement. But what I can tell you is we've got just this razor sharp focus on the outcomes we need to deliver for our customers. Bear in mind, for us, I mean, unlike a lot of other organisations, our customers are also our shareholders. It does make it nice. We've got this nice sort of, if we do really well with the customers, we've also done pretty well from it as a shareholder. So we've got a very, there's no ambiguity over what we need to do here inside this organisation. So I'd say we've probably started getting that focus and holding ourselves to account. We've sort of done the cluster bombing along the senior leadership, and we're talking about the sort of the top 25 general and executive general managers in the organisation, and then in the way that they're being held to account for those results. Quite often that involves those third parties, and that sort of happens through contracts rather than through explicit KPIs. But it's probably nothing stopping us from taking that next step.
You see it evolving. I know a lot of you guys have toolbox sessions at the start of the day around safety. Obviously a big focus. Do you see a point where you're having a toolbox session around customer?
Well, I've got to tell you, I spend a lot of time having those toolbox talks, and sort of not necessarily, and not blended in with safety, but I spend an inordinate amount of time with our teams talking through exactly what the outside world is looking at. Just to give you an idea of sort of the extent to which we're going through it, and again, this was an outcome from our processes of last year. But we've got a program internally here, and you'll have to excuse the pun, but it's called Powering Ahead. Two-day session where we take our teams out off-site 2 days, and we run them through a whole range of things that matter to our organisation and our customers. So we've basically covered about 20% of our workforce so far. And the plan is to get through 100% of the workforce over the course of the next 12 months. And a really big part of that is actually getting them to walk through the shoes of some of our not direct connect customers. They're big, they're sophisticated. It's actually more the indirect customers. So thinking about it, sort of residential customers, and so Narelle in particular has done a lot of work to actually sort of take some, and this came out as a part of her work that she's been doing on that sort of homogeneous customer, making sure we're not thinking like that. But we're literally reminding people what the family circumstances are going to be. So there's scenarios where you're in the pensioner household, or the single parent household, or the Indigenous household, and you've got the budgets that they deal with in a year or a quarter, and here's the bill, and here are the decisions that they're trying to make and face, and trying to bring that to life. To me, it's like one of the best toolbox talks you could ever do, because it sort of starts to become almost a little bit experiential. Look, again, we've only got through 20% of the workforce, but it's had a tremendous impact on that 20% of people who've been through that process. There's a bunch of other things we do as well over that 2-day period, obviously, but it's all designed to get people to sort of understand exactly what's expected of us as custodians of this transmission network service provider business.
So people can begin to see how what you do cascades down to the kitchen table.
Exactly right.
Excellent.
Yeah, and the really important thing about that too is, look, to be perfectly honest, if you work here at Powerlink, there's nothing average about it. You're paid pretty well. You've got a good job. It's a pretty secure job. You're not going to come up against the same level of rub points that that households do, and it's certainly not for low income households. So it's important for our employees to understand, not only is the customer class not homogeneous, but when you start looking at, say, the residential sector, holy smokes, there are, as you all know, there are, there's even the sophisticated retailers that struggle to, cut it down to less than 6 sub-segments, so.
Yeah. switching gears a little bit, but it's something that I know you personally have sort of been on top of for quite some time. It's it's the transmission of the energy system, in particular, sort of let's base it around net zero emissions by 2050. And the sort of investments we make today in energy will last well beyond 2050. So you've then start to think about, well, potential stranded asset risk, or how can we reuse? And so just with your thoughts on how do we get through to net zero emissions by 2050, if that is the goal, without blowing up customer bills, without destroying reliability, how do we make sure that everyone comes along for the journey and able to avoid the worst of the risks and adopt the best of the opportunities? Is there a bit of a mud map in your mind?
Yeah, there is. And it's something I've spent a huge amount of time working on since I've arrived here at Powerlink, and look, probably beforehand as well, which won't surprise you, Andrew. But for me, there's a couple of really important principles. The first thing is our job, I think, at Powerlink is to try and, to the extent that we can, try and match the change in the RAB to the change in energy consumption. Now, it's not always going to be easy for all the obvious reasons, but that's what we've got to try and do if we're going to keep power prices, in a zone that we all consider acceptable, stable, and reflective of the resources. The second thing is I'm not a big fan of sort of unfettered large central grids. I find there are some proposals at the moment, I've got to tell you, Andrew, that worry me a bit. I think, renewable energy zones, fundamentally, organisations like ours and some of our, let me just say, sophisticated generator development counterparties, we need to learn how to start to house some of these costs and risks ourselves. And not just keep looking to sort of shove, costs of, development, just having the consumer as the default all the time. It's not a sustainable model. And I think I'm optimistic about navigating this path. And the reason I'm optimistic about navigating this path is we're in the lowest interest rate environment we've ever been in. There's a wall of money out there trying to find a home, and I think we've got some assets that suit some of those risk appetites, where we can house that risk. That the returns might be a smidgen more than the regulatory ones, but at least customers won't be paying for them. And if they do eventually get an asset like that gets drawn into the regulatory base, it will be because it was needed, not because we needed consumers to house the risk. Does that make sense, Andrew?
Yeah, well, it's almost like we've talked about this before. It's I guess allowing more unregulated business to be done.
Correct.
The more of these costs and risks we can push into the competitive environment, so you subject them to the forces of markets, I think would be a much better outcome for all of us, but particularly consumers, recognising consumers are always going to pay anyway. We're just looking for, and this is where it'd be interesting. A lot of people talk about the most efficient way of going about things, so efficient, but as consumers think about what's least cost, because what might look like an efficient investment may not necessarily lead to least costs for consumers. And I think we need to be having that conversation. I'm just talking about what you're talking about, is that we can't just expect consumers to be the bucket. There's got to be other ways to do it that actually allows some of this to fall into the market to create competition.
I think that's right, Andrew. And the other thing is too, is, look, I mean, the ISP is a necessary, our integrated system plan. I understand why we've got to do that, but let me assure you it's wrong. It just is. I mean, I've been forecasting this industry all my working career, and I can tell you, like a broken watch, I'm usually right twice a day, sort of thing. But we can't fail to plan. But what I can tell you is, it just has to do with information and competitive forces. No central process can ever capture the diversity of risk appetites, expected returns, unique opportunities. It's just, models and modelling processes are great. We've got to use them, but we're going to be wrong. And what we've got to do is make sure we adjust quickly. My concern with or my fear for our industry is that we start to pre-lock in things that are a little bit further out in the distance, with very incomplete information. And I think, I guess some of the things that I've been thinking about internally with the team here is how do we start to move away from, relying on a default plan like that and actually starting to take on some bespoke risks, in a managed way. I don't want to sound like I'm turning Powerlink into a casino, but my background is, as you know, I spent a lot of time running trading floors and power project development. So I understand what I think, can be done between sophisticated, investors, generation developers, and a good, well-resourced and really sharp, with a good planning team, transmission network service provider. And I don't think it all needs to default to the customer.
No, that's hallelujah to that. Is this something you think we could pursue with more vigour through Better Together as part of the charter?
So my starting point is I've had this conversation with the Energy Security Board, and I've promised to get them something very soon, and I'm sort of desperately trying to make that happen, sort of, ideally, by next week. Just a sort of a set of concepts. Now, Andrew, that you come up with a playbook like this, it's going to raise as many questions as it's going to solve. But like all of these complex things, number one, I don't want to die wondering. Number two, the journey to Rome starts with a step.
Okay, interesting. I think we've got a few more conversations to have after this then, Paul. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Andrew. Cassandra.
Thanks, Claire, and good to see you this afternoon, Paul, and Gerald as the communications person with the communication of the Energy Charter. You're the first one, I think, who's actually done that background.
Well, I'm a one-man Energy Charter promotion machine, Cassandra. That's my standard Zoom backdrop. I'm on about 4 Energy Charter calls a week, so Sabine and I usually have the background going.
Good for you. Look, I wanted to just go big picture and then a couple of smaller issues out of the disclosure. Paul, with the sort of policy background and understanding where you fit in the overall systems of delivery of affordable, reliable, clean, as we can get it, energy, right now we can't afford to not be focused on the biggest game changers, I think. We've got a doubling of the unemployment level. It's going to be grim. As rent eviction moratoriums come off, as mortgage, bills start to hit, the political pressure and the real pressure is going to be intense in terms of the affordability of energy. And that could go any number of ways if we don't get it right in terms of the real responses. So in your role as a sort of a champion of the collaboration, where do you see, for example, in the Queensland environment, the best bang for our buck? The panel has a role here, but I think, there's the area, of course, of predictive risk in terms of particular customers and what we're doing around data to understand where those risks are and being on the front foot. Obviously, the retail end is the end of the road. The second is, large-scale rollout of energy efficiency and how we actually get that happening and the role of the businesses in that. We've seen examples of it being done, but it's not at the scale we need. And the third area, of course, is distributed energy and where that fits in terms of overall transmission and making sure that the equity issues of rolling that out for customers is really a hot issue. So I just want to allow you, in your role in the Energy Charter work, to be clear about what you think would deliver and where in the participation in the Better Together processes or other processes you think we can really scale up the effort to get better outcomes for the customer at the end of the road.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things, I guess. The first point I'd probably highlight is that up here in Queensland, and I'll limit all my comments to Queensland. I mean, I can speak fluently to any region, but given where I'm now based and my more recent history, it's probably the best place for me to focus on. So, as an industry, we've really tortured customers from about 2007 through to about, I'm going to say 2015 as an industry, the whole industry, right across the supply chain. We did everything we could to send power prices up at 4 times the rate of wages growth. And that's for the average consumer and the average income earner. So if you're at the lower end of that, obviously it's a even more grim picture. So for quite some time, and predating this role, I think any of us who understood this have known we've had this responsibility to bring those numbers back down again. And of course, there's a lot of people across the supply chain that are working to do exactly that. And what I can tell you is that over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, the industry in Queensland has really bent that price curve back down. So prices have been falling in absolute, not only in nominal, but in real terms as well. In addition to that, I can tell you what the reason when I left AGL, I took on the Director General role up in Queensland of the Department of Energy, and I had one goal when I went into that organisation, and my one goal was to reform the concessions framework in Queensland. It wasn't on the agenda of the government, and I thought that's what I want to try and do. And when I've done that, that'll be my benchmark to success. As it turns out, it only took 18 months. Just killed the central agencies with data and sort of explained to them what hardship really looks like, where hardship was really being felt. It wasn't about pensioners and Queensland seniors. It was all about the average age of hardship. What it looked like was 44 years old. And the more you dug into it, it was 44 years old, quite often a single parent family, really big housing costs, big rental bills or big mortgage costs, and none of our concessions hit that group at all, not a cent. So that policy was put into action in 2017 up here in Queensland. It's I think at the moment, it's probably $340 a year paid in 4 instalments. So that was a good start. The government did other things from a policy perspective, and the industry can keep helping inform government on how to keep fine-tuning, those structures and supports. And the industry itself has got to keep power prices, under control and in the right direction. For our part, we need to be ever thinking about, if we're going to take a piece of, transmission element out, what impact is that going to have on the wholesale price? And do we really need to do it on that day if that's the case? How do we get dynamic line rating so that when we've got these zero marginal cost renewable generators going with it, we don't constrain them off any more than they need to be. If there's line condition, let's max out on what we can do. I mean, they're all the things that as an industry, as an organisation, as an industry, we can do is at that big picture level, keep those electricity bills, keep the price of power as low as we can. In terms of appliance efficiency, and that I did do some work on that before I left government, and there was a scheme that started about 10 seconds after I left, and apparently it was very well subscribed. It was just levels of subsidies to consumers if they went and bought a 5-star appliance and things like that. So that was quite successfully orchestrated. We also ran some pilots where we put solar PV on rooftops. So one that I was, in fact, it won the Queensland Policy of the Year. Unfortunately, I wasn't there to collect it, but we put solar PV panels on rooftops at Lockhart River, a remote Indigenous community up in the Cape. So we virtually sprayed solar PV on every big rooftop we could, and we gave all the households basically a dividend every year. They'd get a $100 dividend out of the solar PV because it was reducing the cost of running diesel and so on. So there's lots of policies and policy levers we can pull and run these trials. We also ran some trials in Cairns where we swept through a whole bunch of low-income households and put solar PV on their rooftops, and of course it was all government-owned housing stock.
Just on that one, talk about the rollout of doing energy audits and the retrofitting and the. Do you think energy charter signatories are doing enough in that area?
Look, it's hard for me to comment on the individual players, Cassandra, because I literally just back in, I've spent the last sort of, 3 years back in the wholesale markets and building, big batteries and wind farms. So I'm having to sort of catch up for a bit of lost time on the retail market. So I'm not sure is the short answer. What I do know is that, government policy settings, tweaking and creating incentives, you get a surprising response from participants in our broader supply chains. One of the other things too, can I just add before I hand back to you, is a tremendous opportunity for us, I think, as an industry up here, and we'll no doubt when new governments form up here, whoever it is, we're going to end up with a new energy minister, because our sitting minister, Minister Lynham, is sort of going back to his career as one of our sort of top surgeons. But there's an opportunity for us in Queensland. I think we've got so much solar up here now that it's actually, we're almost getting to dangerous levels for system stability. The daytime minimum grid loads are, starting to, they're heading towards that area where we're getting uncomfortable relative to our plant stock. So I'm sort of wondering whether, we really need to be thinking about sort of, something like a, interval meter rollout, free electricity between 11 and 2 every day. We've got to try and do something to sort of keep the system stable. And I think at least starting to run slide rules over policies and programs like that is where our thinking's got to go. The solar sponge type tariffs that you hear talking about, and yeah. I
think I just wanted to get an opportunity from you, where your business fits in the, sort of delivery of the outcomes. Sometimes you can be a bit more, sharp on what you see around you, and because we don't see that given what will happen to the pressure on bills, because it's been there, of course, for a long time, but we're going to get it at a scale again.
Yep.
It's going to get ugly. Whether within this charter process, there are a couple of areas where we should be really pushing signatories to work on it, and work on it really hard. So I'll just pause on that. Can I just then, I just wanted to, acknowledge what looks like some smaller scale initiatives like the scholarships, that kind of approach you're taking to sort of what might be called social license or contribution to local communities, and the Thriving Communities Partnership. I just want to get a sense again of how big you are able to grow that, understanding big business, local communities. We've got huge issues around employment, people at risk of long-term unemployment. What kind of proactive plans could you bring in that are appropriate to your part of the, your business, to deliver on some of those equity and sort of local community benefit aspects of the work?
I guess there's a couple of things. I might throw to Narelle and Jerry as well, but let me just make a few cursory comments. So, look, the first thing I'd say is, mentioning those scholarships with ICANN, I think that was a really good thing for us to do, because I can tell you there's an imbalance in Queensland relative to New South and Victoria. The number of financial counsellors relative to households is bad, unfortunately. So I think anything we can do in that direction is sort of try and narrow that gap. I mean, I think we've got a fifth of the financial counsellors per head of population by comparison to New South and Vic from when I last looked at those metrics years ago. I don't know whether they've changed. They may well have improved dramatically in between, but that's certainly my recollection. So when I saw that internally, it took me 10 seconds to sign off on it. I think from again, thinking about employment and implications arising from that, I can tell you, Cassandra, we have actually been employing people because we're actually doing a lot of work, a lot of maintenance work at the moment. So that's a small contribution, and we can see programs of work that probably lend themselves to employment opportunities, and we obviously won't hesitate on those because it's not having an adverse impact on our price. It's helping our network perform better. So they're the tangible things we can do.
And you've got
Jerry,
some of these big sort of government programs that have just been announced, in terms of the hiring credit, for example.
Yep.
You would be pretty well placed to take some of that up and do demonstration of it. And
yeah, that's right. So we, in fact, I'm going to say even before that had come out, Cassandra, we'd sort of gone out with I think it was about 30 roles we went out for. We were trying to find people who were falling out of the airline industry. As it turns out, we didn't get anyone out of the airline industry, but we managed to employ a lot of good people. We've just finished that process actually of recruitment. But we did the last executive team meeting I had, which was about 48 hours ago. We did indeed speak about that very policy initiative that you're talking about. So with the instruction of the team was go away, have a look.
Right.
Narelle,
Yeah.
Gary, do you guys want to add anything?
Yeah, I just quickly, like I acknowledge, Cassandra, that the ICANN partnership that we're doing with Energy Queensland, as I said, I think it's a really good initiative, but it's something that we've just only started, and we're only just starting Thriving Communities. So I absolutely acknowledge that we are sort of just dipping our toes in the water there. A lot of our community support programs in the past has been when we've been building new infrastructure through communities to really provide that support. What we're really doing now is that we are sort of focusing more on the existing network and the maintenance there. So there is the opportunity for us to sort of recalibrate our sort of community support and sponsorship budget. It's not a huge budget, so I just do want to qualify that. But about how we can, we're really.
Gary, it'd be great for it to be a bit bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, look at that budget's in my area, so I'd love it to be bigger as well, Cassandra. So we are. It's funny how the COVID really told us to look at our existing funding program, and to be honest, without the sort of the shock of the COVID, we probably wouldn't have even come up with the concept about entering into a financial scholarship, a scholarship for financial counsellors with ICANN, and we probably needed that shock from COVID to really start to think about that. But now that our eyes have been opened in that area, I think we're definitely going to be looking at other ways. And how other ways that we can partner with organisations like Thriving Communities. And I might throw to Narelle here because she's, again, we've only just joined, but she's going to be sort of really important to sort of driving that Thriving Communities area. So Narelle?
Yeah, joining Thriving Communities is an interesting one for Powerlink. So a lot of the members who join the Thriving Communities partnership have that transactional and day-to-day relationship with individuals that we just don't have as a transmission business. So we did ask ourselves some questions on what value we could bring to the partnership. But when you look at the fact that we have in the region of 900 employees who have a diverse range of professions and specialist skills and knowledge and expertise that they can bring to the table, while we might not be able to change a policy, a process, put a hardship program in place for Queenslanders directly, we can bring a lot to the table to tackle some of those issues around fair access to essential services. So it makes sense for us to bring our whole selves to the table, our whole experience and wealth of knowledge, both as Powerlink employees, but from our past experiences as well in other organisations around the world. So that's why we've committed to the Thriving Communities Partnership. It's about adding to the mix to solve those bigger problems. And look, if we tackle some of the financial issues facing everyday people across Australia, well, that's a good thing for energy as well.
Yeah, and direct community relationships really help to enhance the culture, the cultural relationships around the business. Thanks, Narelle. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you. And that was going to be my question as well, that I think from the panel's point of view, every business across the supply chain, whether they have direct end-use customers or not, have a role in the costing of energy, and therefore they have a role in the alleviation of that, the impact of that cost. And so it is important that Powerlink does have a look at your contribution, whether it is indirect. It will necessarily be indirect, but it's still very important and will make a big difference. And the ICANN scholarships are a really good start there.
That's a really good point, Claire. And we've previously talked quite proudly across Powerlink that we're only 8% of the electricity bill. And it's great that we're not a massive cost, but we're starting to refocus those conversations with our people. And it's led by our people, not by our leaders, that actually the impact we can have on the overall cost of the energy bill is actually a much greater impact than 8%. So yes, it's a focus on our own costs and being cost conscious within Powerlink at the direct cost that we pass on to consumers. But it's also thinking about that end-to-end impact that we can have on the energy chain. And for me, being part of the Energy Charter, you know, I'm here to make Powerlink more customer focused. The Energy Charter is great for me, helps me do my job, it's awesome. But for me, it's not the power of being an individual member and following the Charter, it's the power to work together across the chain, because no single energy business by itself can actually fix this industry and make better outcomes for consumers. It has to be working together. So it's the Better Together initiatives that we participate in and lead within the Charter that I actually feel is the most powerful part of it.
Absolutely.
And Narelle, can I just ask, of the various activities in the sort of Better Together or the working together across the industry, where do you see the hard work being done that actually is going to make a difference? You know, what's got meat on the bones, do you think?
Well, I was the chair for the Know Your Customers and Communities Better Together initiative for last financial year. For me, that really getting to grips and making sure that organisations are engaging with their customers and really understanding them is the groundwork for making the best possible decisions. So that was a great grounding as an early Better Together initiative, which continues to proceed. Jerry, as chair of the industry working group, probably got a view looking forward on maybe some of the initiatives that are going to have most power over the coming years.
Yeah, thanks, Narelle. I think the one I'll just talk about, like Powerlink's involved in quite a few, but I think the one that's got the real power to really turn the dial is the customer voice at a board level Better Together initiative. And the interesting thing about that is that sort of came from our chair, Kathy Hirschfeld, directly off the panel's report last year. And then there was some clear insights from your report last year about we can hear the customer voice getting up to that senior executive level, but we'd like to see it amplified more at that board level. And I remember that Sabine and I were doing a presentation internally last year to Powerlink staff about the Independent Accountability Panel's report. And we talked about this, and our chair actually just came over to us straight afterwards and said, you know, that is something that I think has got real power, and I think it's something that could form a Better Together initiative. And she is like the champion for that initiative. And what we're trying to do over the coming sort of 5 to 6 months is develop a series of resources to ensure that board members across all types of different energy industries can access different tools and resources to improve the way that the customer voice is heard at that board level. And I think that's probably one that I'm most excited about over the coming 12 months.
Look, we are running out of time, but a couple of things for you, Paul. One is, given your opening statement about your level of initial cynicism about the Energy Charter, it's important, if there is a real commitment, that your staff who are involved in this, it's not a tack on to their full-time jobs, so they have to do it in some extra time or other. So it does come back to you as to whether you are prepared to make that commitment, I suppose.
Yeah, Claire, I mean, I do think about that a lot. I guess, and my, the lens I look through is, provided we're doing lots and lots of doing, then I'm happy to, I'm happy to see and put my weight behind this. If we spend too much time reporting, I'm going to start getting frustrated. So, and at the moment, what I've found in my experience so far has been, look, pulling together the report obviously takes time, reviewing it, putting up through boards and all that sort of stuff. But it's okay. It's not to me, it wasn't onerous. I mean, it was crikey, compared to doing the annual accounts and the annual report, it was a breeze, right? So, and I think provided we spend, 90% of our time actually doing stuff that's going to make a difference, and we think about this from a, let me call it the bureaucratic costs of administering the process. As long as we keep them, at the moment, I feel like the cost and the benefits way outweighing that cost, if that makes sense, Claire. And I think as long as we keep it that way, I'm happy.
And so just in closing, Paul, what are a couple of things that you would really like to see from our report this year to convince you of the continuing value of the Charter and the areas that will make a difference?
Look, it's a good question, Claire, and I don't know that I've necessarily got a coherent answer for you. The thing I value out of it the most is that it does seem to be putting a bit of a needle and thread through all the things that we're doing, as an organisation in terms of trying to deliver outcomes for customer. And as long as it continues to do that for us, it's going to serve us well, and we should continue on that way. The bigger question is, you should be asking me, what am I going to do that's going to make a big difference in the next year? And I think my answer to you is, a big part of the conversation I had with the board of Powerlink, before I was appointed, tell me the big battle plans, and I guess they were pretty simple ones. World class was a lot of the narrative, and if you're not customer focused, you're not going to be world class. That's for sure. That's the first point. But for me, I was sort of really big on getting Powerlink to sort of assert itself in that policy making space, because we've got the skill sets and we can add the value that will actually get better outcomes for the whole economy. And I think that the one that I'm going to throw out there to say, one of the big things we can really make a difference on, I think, is coming up with a far more innovative way of delivering renewable energy zones. If we can do that well, Cassandra will be creating a whole bunch of jobs just by virtue of the fact that we're building stuff. Andrew, we're going to be doing it in a way where your customers aren't paying for it. And we'll find a way to do it efficiently and get an allocation of risk that actually is a far better match for a low interest rate environment, lots of money trying to find a home, lots of people who need jobs, and a power system that could do with a little bit more decarbonising and zero marginal cost energy coming in, with that caveat of we do need to keep the lights on and make sure we do it in a fairly well focused manner. And that's the thing I want to try and pull off this year. And I hope when I'm sitting down here with you this time next year, I'm talking to you about when we're planning on turning sides, rather than still talking about whether we won the policy debate or not.
Well, look, that's an excellent place to finish on that optimistic note. So thank you very much, Paul, and all of you, and we will talk to you next after we submit our report.
Great. Thanks, Claire. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.